I was joined by Megan Brand, who is the executive director for the Colorado Fund for People with Disabilities, which is the pooled trust for the state of Colorado for people with disabilities. And her office was involved in a case that started back in 2018 and wound its way not only through the courts, but also through the legislative process. And Megan really adds a lot of insight into what happens as a case that is winding its way through the courts, but is also going through rulemaking up at Capitol Hill at the same time. So being able to be involved in that case, their group was not the person bringing the case. They were rather the trust, and one of their beneficiaries was the actual plaintiff in the case that then wound its way, actually stayed in the local court because of a decision made by the Medicaid office. But it was just a really interesting case. Megan talks a lot about how the elder law community really stepped up and helped them out as they were advocating for transfers made to a pooled trust by someone over the age of 65 to stay as non-countable, basically a non-penalized transfer, which in the case it brought up really was impactful to the beneficiary on maintaining their community Medicaid benefits, being able to get the services that they need, while also being able to save a little bit of the money that they received from a medical malpractice settlement claim to supplement their care. So really is an interesting case. We provided a redacted version of that case because the beneficiary requested that. So we have provided that to you so you can read kind of what the case stands for and then kind of Megan's story about what happened behind the case. And this really is a true example of what I wanted to create with this video series. Big thank you to Megan and big thank you to all the Colorado elder law attorneys that participated in this particular case and helped maintain good law here in Colorado for those beneficiaries that are over the age of 65. So please enjoy this video. I found it very interesting, and thanks again to Megan for being so open and willing to share her experience with this case. Could you introduce yourself and the Colorado Fund for People with Disabilities?
Yes, thanks, Jim. I'm Megan Brand. I'm the executive director of the Colorado Funds for People with Disabilities, and we're a nonprofit organization that was established in 1994. We are the largest and longest standing pooled trust here in Colorado. And in addition, we administer a number of individual trusts for people with disabilities, and we are an organizational representative payee and provide conservatorships and a few other financial services across the state.
Well, awesome. And thank you so much for joining me here on this Behind the Case series. And what we want to talk about is not so much a case-centered conversation today. It is a huge part of what we'll talk about today, but more a kind of a larger view of how transfers to a pooled trust for folks with special needs over the age of 65, how that policy has kind of evolved in Colorado over the time that you've been with CFPD. So I think before we get into the case facts, why don't we talk a little bit about how that particular policy has evolved? Obviously, CMS has come out with some different types of policy statements for states to implement and kind of how that has evolved in Colorado specifically during your time with the organization.
Sure. Well, it goes back even further than my time with the organization. Really, at the start of CFPD in '94, we started the pooled trust with people over the age of 65 who were receiving settlements related to abuse and neglect of their treatment in nursing facilities. So they were all over the age of 65, some of our very first beneficiaries. So that was how it began. And then that continued for about 6 years, and then for the next 5 years, the transfers for 65 and older were not allowed, and then they were for another 6. I mean, it really just was a roller coaster of events. So when I started over 20 years ago at CFPD as a case manager. By the way, I'm not an attorney. I always like to make that clear to
Fair
people.
enough.
But I started as a case manager, and one of my first jobs was to start meeting with people over 65 and writing spending plans, which we're going to talk a little bit more about later. But really, my entire time I've been at CFPD, this has been an issue here in Colorado.
And kind of what, just a little background for folks that might not know what we're talking about is in certain states, if you make a transfer and you're over the age of 65 to a pooled trust, that's either a countable transfer that's penalized, or in other states, it's a non-countable transfer and it's not penalized because it's made for or fair compensation is the words that is the language that the court uses in this particular case. So that's kind of a little bit of background of where these transfers, and I know in a lot of different states, they're treated differently in each and every state. And like you said, with the pooled trust, trying to figure out how to handle these and advise their clients or your clients, it can be difficult to figure out, are these going to jeopardize your beneficiaries' Medicaid benefits? And we want to make sure that those benefits that are really, really important to those beneficiaries are preserved, if they can be. And one of the key components to that, you mentioned it earlier, is an actuarially sound uh, spending plan. Can you talk a little bit about what goes into that plan and what makes it work for Medicaid purposes in making sure that that preserves those benefits?
Sure. So when people join the pooled trust, we always meet with them. That's one of the characteristics of our services, is that we meet with them and talk more about the trust and how it works, and then do some more planning. But with our individuals who are over the age of 65, we actually meet with them before they fund the trust. And what we're trying to determine in that meeting is, can we serve them? And so we write a spending plan that is very specific to their needs. It looks at how old they are, what is their life expectancy according to the Social Security actuarial table. That's what we have somewhat agreed upon with Colorado Medicaid. There's been some challenges to that too, but we're not going to get into that today. And then based on the amount of money that they are transferring, how are we going to spend that over their life? And I would say 85% of the time, we are able to show that we're going to spend that money not only within their life expectancy, but within several years, before their life expectancy. There have been a few times when we have determined that we don't have enough supplemental needs to use their trust for based on the amount of money and their life expectancy. So we
Yeah.
have turned people away. But for the most part, we're able to find things that are individual and specific to them that they can use their trust for. And then it's really a budget. It's a budget that shows this is what some one-time expenditures are. These are what some ongoing expenditures are, and this is what it's going to look like over the course of the next several years.
Great. Thanks for explaining that, because that does become really, really important as we get into the case facts.
Yes.
And then with the pool trust, what happens in Colorado with CFPD if there are funds left in that trust when the beneficiary passes away? I know that can vary based on different states and
Yep.
what they allow. What is the Colorado position, or what was it prior to this case,
Yeah.
and kind of where
The
that's landed?
Sure. Colorado follows the federal statute, which says that the funds can be retained by the nonprofit organization that is administering the trust at the time of death. So since our inception in 94, that is what we have always done. We have retained 100% of the funds at the time of death. And then
Okay,
you want to know how we use the funds.
sure.
Because I always feel bad saying, like, we take it and then
Yeah, right.
we do use it. So like I mentioned before, one of the things that really sets our organization apart from many, not all, because thankfully there are a lot of great pooled trusts out there that operate like we do. But we provide case management services to every one of our trust beneficiaries. And that often involves, above and beyond administering their trust. So for instance, meeting with them in their home, helping them through life transitions if necessary, meeting them in the community to go shopping if it comes to that, helping them to buy an appropriate accessible vehicle, helping them at the time of their Social Security or a Medicaid redetermination to gather all the documents and submit that. So really our services is pretty broad and specific, again, to what the person, if they don't need all of those services because they're getting it from some other Medicaid paid service, then we don't provide it, but we're available to. We also serve as an organizational representative payee. We currently serve over 150 people across the state, and we're working to expand that to 200 or more. So we supplement that with our charitable fund as well. We do collect a fee for our service, but Social Security limits us to about $50 a month. That covers about 50% of our cost. So we supplement that with our charitable fund as well, and with some grants that we receive. And we often pay for legal or other professional fees that support a group of people. So for instance, the board did make the decision to pursue this litigation related to 65 and older and support that with the funds of the charitable fund, because
Gotcha.
it was
Gotcha.
affecting a group or a class of people. And we felt it was a really strong advocacy effort that we needed to put resources behind. We provide a lot of education and advocacy on public benefits, on trusts, on future planning. And then we're involved both locally and nationally in best practices of pooled trusts. We help with a organizational representative payee group, with a lot of public policy, not just for pooled trusts, but really for trusts in general that are affecting people with disabilities.
Excellent. Thanks for filling me in there.
Sure.
Let's kind of set the table now for this particular case. We have provided the case holding. It is redacted, and that is based on a request from the beneficiaries and their attorneys in this case. But you can get a really good synopsis of what the case facts are through reading the case. And we're not going to get into a lot of the heavy material in the case because the attorneys can read the case. But I do want you to kind of set up the situation and where Colorado Medicaid was and what their policy was right before this case was where the decision was made by the board, obviously, to pursue this litigation as well. Obviously, you all weren't a party to this case, but one of your beneficiaries was.
That's correct. Yes. So we were in one of those periods, roller coaster moments, where the department was not approving trusts for people over 65. So our first attempt was to propose a change in legislation to
Okay.
change the statute. And we got pretty far in discussions. We had it drafted. We had sponsors, and then made it to, I think, one committee meeting, and the department, Colorado Medicaid, attached a really hefty fiscal note. They claimed that they were going to lose federal match of Medicaid funding, which, by the way, had not happened in any other states, but that was what they were claiming was going to happen. So we ended up, our legislation did not make it out of committee.
Gotcha.
So during those discussions, they said, you really just need to fight this in the litigation, realm instead. And so what the problem was is that we weren't given a case that we could appeal. They were just not sending us the proper notices. So we brought that to their attention, and then we started getting notices that we could appeal. So with this particular woman, she sustained an injury, a brain injury, due to a doctor's overdose of medication, and she was significantly injured at the age of 57, and she received a nice sized personal injury settlement, which she then used to personally pay for her care for the next several years, actually for 8 years.
Right.
So ultimately, she needed nursing home level of care, and she was running out of money. So in 2013, she was 65 years old, and she transferred just over $29,000 into the pool trust. So she had just turned 65. I mean, it really was kind of a timing issue.
Right.
Just turned 65, transferred just over 29,000. So we did the spending plan, and we're going to easily be able to spend her funds in her lifetime. And the department counted it as a transfer without fair consideration. And like they had been doing with many other people, they did not analyze the spending plan that we submitted. We
Okay.
really, at that point, were just getting letters from the department. There was a change in the trust officer. We were just getting letters saying denied, denied.
Denied. Denied. And just a little bit about the spending plan, because I think that's really important for people to understand kind of the specific spending personal to her in this particular plan. I don't know if you have it in front of you
I
or
don't.
remember. Oh, okay, I can bring it up. But there was
Okay.
the spending plan sets forth one-time expenditures totaling $4,350, including a deposit fee, a setup fee, an assessment plan fee. Um, let's see, do furniture of $800, a conservatorship fees of 2,000, an attorney fee of 800, and then estimated ongoing expenditures in the amount of the case management fee, bookkeeping fee, dental care, wheelchair maintenance or replacement of $500 a year, accessible van lift maintenance and repairs of $1,000 a year, and a $50 a month for alternative therapy, totaling $600 per year. At the time the spending plan was drafted, her life expectancy was 20.19 years. So to her, a lot of this is dental care, making sure that she can get transportation that she needs.
Right.
And that was really important to her. And that's when you're talking about making sure these spending plans are individual. That's a good example of that. Is that pretty common when you're doing these spending plans?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, in this situation, she has a guardian who is a family member, and I believe he continues to visit her regularly, if not daily. And so having a van where he could take her into the community was really, really important. And if you think about it, and if somebody's receiving Medicaid and in a nursing home, they don't have the funds to do that. Here in
Right.
Colorado, you get $100 in personal needs a month, roughly. It's not going to pay for all of that van maintenance and gas and insurance and the dental care. You really need to have those additional funds to be able to make that work.
And with the actuarially sound test being part of it, you can see here that that $29,000 probably isn't gonna make it the 20 years
Right,
pursuant to her life expectancy.
right, right. That's true.
And that's a key component, obviously, to the case. So let's talk about you appeal this, you get the denial, then what happens?
So we get the denial, and then we appealed it through the administrative law judge, through that process. And here in Colorado, the way that that process works is that you might win at the ALJ level, but then it goes back to Colorado Medicaid, the entity that you're, against, to make the final decision. So guess what? They chose in Colorado Medicaid. So
But
we, yeah,
let's slow down. You won at the ALJ level, or the case was won
at
at
the
the ALJ level.
it was
Favorable decision.
favorable at the
Yes.
ALJ level. Yes, very good point. And so then at that point, we had the choice to either go into state district court or federal court. I still remember some of those discussions about what timeline was going to be the best, what judge was going to be involved, what was their knowledge of Medicaid going to be.
Right.
And we went the state district court route. Did not end up being fast. It ended up, we didn't get a decision until 2018. So I believe we waited 2 years for the final decision from the state district court.
Wow.
I love to say, I get kind of dramatic, but it was an 18-page single space decision. I mean,
And we have that link so folks can read that as well.
it's really, really thorough, and is again, we won on almost every fact. We tried, there were a few things related to um the harm and trying to get attorney fees paid and things like that, which we were not successful in, but the meat of the issue we were, and that's what we really want. So ultimately, yes, we won at that level. That was great.
The resolution was that transfers to a pooled trust with a spending plan would not be a penalized transfer because they were made for consideration, was kind of the, is that
That's
a way to summarize that?
right. And that plan, not only should it be written by us, but analyzed by the department.
Right.
That they had the onus to review it and determine if it met that criteria.
Okay, so you get this determination from the court. You're obviously in communication with Colorado Medicaid at this point. Do they appeal that decision, or kind of what happens after that?
Yeah, we really hoped they would, because we wanted it to go to the Supreme Court, but they didn't. They didn't appeal. So from that point, we went back and forth. Colorado issues these memo series, which are really kind of a further determination of the regulations. And so we were going back and forth to develop a memo series that would outline some more of the finer points of the spending plan, when it would be revised, what criteria it needed to have. And we went back and forth for quite a while, and we finally went to a meeting with them. Our attorney was present, and we talked for a little bit more. The issue at that point, interestingly, was determination of life expectancy and the impact. What if somebody had like a grave disease or something? How, what that was really what we couldn't agree on. And so at that point, at the end of the meeting, they just handed us a proposed regulation and said, well, this is what we're going to do. And it was devastating, because the proposed regulation was to just cut off any transfers for people age 65 and older,
Okay.
and also to limit the amount that we could retain to 50%, so that upon somebody's death, we could only retain 50% of the funds in the account, and the other 50% would be payable to Colorado Medicaid.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is they said, okay, we lost to the court. We're just
Mhm.
going to make a regulation that says transfers over the age of 65 to a pooled trust or penalized transfers, and the pooled trust can only retain 50% of whatever's left in that trust if there is anything left at the
That's right.
beneficiary's death.
That's right.
Okay,
Correct.
so they've said this is what we're doing. We're going to make a new rule. What's the process to get a new rule in place in Colorado that they obviously need to go through? And this is where you really rallied the troops.
Yes, yes. So I really took a crash course in rulemaking, with a lot of help with some really, brilliant attorneys and professionals who had been through this process. But what happens is they have to go to the Medical Services Board, and the Medical Services Board is made up of really, I don't know that it's any attorneys, medical doctors, service professionals, and the rule first has to be introduced, um just like, this, here's what we plan to do, and then there's a first reading and a final reading, and
Okay.
then the Medical Services Board votes. So I immediately contacted everyone I knew, and my board contacted everyone they knew, and I mean, it really just spread. And um this was in, I believe, July of 2019. um, that sounds about right. Because the decision came out July of 2018. So yeah,
Yep.
we fought about it for a year. Yeah,
Yep.
I think that's right. So we held a meeting, and we it was standing room only in our conference room. This was pre-video calls, pre-COVID. So we had standing room only in our conference room. I was so excited to see so many people there to support us. They fired questions at me. Many of the things they wanted to know: how do you use your charitable fund? Why is this important? How many people over 65 joined the trust? What's the impact here? And from there, we, got a lot of interest. And by the way, we had people there from the ARCs. We had lots of attorneys who work in this area, elder law attorneys primarily. We had other professional trustees, people from NAMI, and really a lot of the different advocacy groups were present. And from there, we held a series of kind of small group meetings following that to figure out how we were going to tackle this issue. And then we started calling people to action. How can you help us? Here's the issue. We put together a lot of fact sheets about what the issue was and how we needed their help. And so we started getting letters of support that people were writing, and then people signed up to do testimony.
Okay.
And you want me to just keep going?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Okay. So we had people there to testify for the introduction of the rule, which I guess doesn't happen typically, but I didn't know any better. So the Services Board knew from the beginning, oh, this is going to be controversial. So we were there then, and then when they did their first reading, we had, I think, over 18 people there to testify, and more people who had written testimony. And there were so many people that they said, we typically give people 5 minutes, you only get 3.
Okay.
And of course we panicked because this is such a difficult to explain issue to people who don't don't work in this area. So we had to break it down. You're going to talk about
you'll talk about this, you'll talk about this.
Yes. And I mean, we had the testimony, and the people signed up, organized, in such a way that we were telling the story from person to person. And we had so many different groups that were represented there. I think you were going to put that in the materials as well, all the different community partners that we brought together. So many different disciplines, many people wearing 2 or 3 hats. I'm part of Colorado NALA, and I'm part of the Colorado Guardianship Association, and I'm, a professional fiduciary, for instance. So they all came together and testified, and the medical services, they called a break, a recess. And there was just a lot, going on because of all this testimony.
Sure.
And Colorado Medicaid, at one point, the Medical Services Board chair said, we have never seen that the amount of testimony that we have seen on this rule change is unprecedented. And Colorado Medicaid, we want to know what you want to do here, because, the Medical Services Board could really see the impact that this was going to have. So we came back from recess, and Colorado Medicaid pulled the regulation.
Okay, so this was at the introduction. They had all that testimony, and at that point,
not at the introduction. I'm sorry, I skipped ahead to the first reading.
Okay.
So this was at the first reading of the rule.
Gotcha.
Yes. So they pulled it, and then it didn't even go to final reading. And at that point, I think we didn't know if they were going to come back with something different, or if they were, going to just drop it. And they dropped it.
And so where are we today?
Where are we today?
After all of that.
We have a new person who is in the department, who that heads up the trust officers who reviews, and I find that she and her team are pretty reasonable, and we have had much better communications in the last several years. I think that we have an understanding of each other, and we are allowing people over the age of 65 and continuing to bring them in with a spending plan.
Okay.
And the department is allowing them. They have kind of over time created some, I wouldn't say that they're rule changes, but some expectations that we need to follow that weren't
Sure.
there in the beginning. So now when we get the letter that says we approve, they say if there are any changes to the spending plan, we need to be notified of them. If there are any additional deposits that were not planned for, we need to know about them. And we want you to send us an annual accounting. So that was new because that was not a requirement in the past. And I can tell you that they are definitely reviewing those annual accountings. So our staff has to be really vigilant. We have a process for doing an annual trust review. And if we notice that somebody is not following their spending plan or not spending like we expected, or did or didn't get the deposits that we expected, then we're needing to redo the spending plan, or we're needing to reach out to the beneficiary and find out why. And maybe, in some cases, hey, you haven't planned that trip yet, that annual trip yet. Can I help you with it?
Right.
And so I think that through this, we're really accountable and showing the department that we're really keeping tabs on these trusts and on this funding.
Yeah, it sounds like in 2023, at least, you've kind of landed in a place that makes sense on the Medicaid side to make sure that these funds are being
Right.
spent for the benefit of that beneficiary. And at the same time, you're providing, they're still allowing those Medicaid benefits to continue to flow to the people that need them,
Right.
obviously, that are getting their supplemental care through the pooled trust.
Correct. Yes.
Well, my final question on all these is, what was your biggest takeaway from this experience and going through this process?
My my biggest takeaway is the importance of community partnerships. And that really extends both statewide and nationally. At a national level, we've now seen that these spending plans the other states are following suit. There was a Supreme Court decision in Minnesota that ultimately adopted the spending plan there. Kansas now has it written into their regulations that they have to do a spending plan for 65 and older. Wisconsin has something similar, Massachusetts. So there really has been a lot of work done nationally on this issue as well. But most importantly, here in Colorado, those community partnerships were so important. That was how our trust was first created by all of these organizations coming together to create CFPD, and that continues. And I don't take all the credit for that. That's really our staff,
Sure.
doing a good job day to day, because they're interacting with so many people on a daily basis that represent all of these agencies, so that when something like this happens, we can do that call to action and people respond. Um, I really think also that I learned that you can't give up when you believe in something. When I believe in this, because it was unfair, it was
Right.
especially unfair for people who were 65 and older. And so, not to give up. And our board of directors is so very supportive and has always taken this issue in particular as a priority. And so I had all of their support. I think probably 80% of the board showed up that day to testify as well. You
Yeah.
know, they they are such a big part of our organization, and that so that's really, at the end of it all, I guess it comes back to um I'm a social worker at heart, and those relationships that I make with people, are based on that's really what makes our work valuable and important, and leaving impact in Colorado.
Yeah, and I think that that rings true for a lot of elder law attorneys, and the reason that they
Absolutely.
get into this practice area and pursue these cases. And thank you so much for sharing your experience, what that process was like, and especially the importance of those community partnerships and working with the people that have the passion and rallying the troops something like this is it might be happening, and you really need a full group effort to make sure that people are treated fairly.
Absolutely.
Thank,
Agreed.
thank you so much, Megan. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate the opportunity.